The storm rolled in faster than anyone had expected. Wind howled through the city streets, rattling signs and overturning trash cans. Rain poured down in thick sheets, blurring headlights and making the sidewalks slick with water. David tightened his grip on the umbrella, shielding himself and his husband, Eric, as they hurried down the street. They had just finished dinner at their favorite little bistro when they heard it, a faint, panicked cry slicing through the chaos of the storm. David stopped mid-step, heart pounding. "Did you hear that?" Eric nodded, already scanning the sidewalk. Another cry, high-pitched, desperate. Then, through the rain, they saw him, a small boy, no older than 5, standing alone near the edge of the curb. His tiny hands trembled as he wiped his soaked face, his dark curls plastered to his forehead. David and Eric exchanged a quick, knowing glance. The child was lost. Alone. Terrified. Then came the real horror. Just beyond the curb, headlights cut through the rain, and the boy took an uncertain step forward. David didn't think. He just ran. David Carter had always been the kind of person who stopped for stray animals, helped elderly neighbors carry groceries, and gave away his last dollar if someone else needed it more. He had a heart too big for the world, as Eric liked to say, and sometimes it got him into trouble. But David never saw kindness as a weakness. It was a responsibility. He and Eric had been married for 3 years, building a quiet life together in the heart of the city. Their apartment, a cozy 2-bedroom with large windows overlooking the park, was filled with mismatched furniture, photographs from their travels, and the soft scent of vanilla candles. It was home, even if the world outside sometimes tried to make them feel otherwise. Eric, ever the cautious one, was David's anchor. Where David rushed in head first, Eric thought things through. A successful architect, he had a mind built for structure and problem-solving. They balanced each other perfectly, David's boundless empathy and Eric's steady pragmatism. Together, they had built a life that felt safe, despite the occasional disapproving stares or whispers from strangers. But no amount of experience could have prepared them for what happened that night. The storm had turned the city into a battlefield of flashing lights and rushing cars. The streets glistened under the heavy downpour, reflecting neon signs and traffic signals. Pedestrians moved quickly, hunching under umbrellas or pulling coats tighter against the wind. It was the kind of night where people kept their heads down, too focused on their own discomfort to notice anything else. That's why the child stood out. David had spent years working as a youth counselor before transitioning into social work. He had seen that look before, wide eyes filled with panic, tiny hands shaking with uncertainty. A lost child in the middle of a storm was never a good sign. Eric's voice was tense beside him. "David, be careful." But David was already moving, heart pounding as he stepped toward the trembling boy. His soaked sneakers splashed through a puddle, but he didn't care. "Hey, buddy," he called softly, crouching down a few feet away. "Are you okay?" The boy flinched, his lower lip quivering. He looked around, eyes darting from one unfamiliar face to another, searching for something, someone that wasn't there. Eric stood close behind, scanning the area. Where are his parents? David didn't have an answer. All he knew was that this child was alone, afraid, and standing far too close to the street. And in a world that sometimes turned a blind eye, David and Eric were about to make a choice that would change everything. The boy didn't speak. He just stood there, rain-soaked and shivering, his small hands clenched into fists at his sides. His eyes, dark, wide, full of fear, flickered between David and Eric, as if unsure whether to trust them or run. David's heart squeezed. He had seen fear like this before in children who had lost more than just their way home. Kneeling to the boy's level, David softened his voice. "Hey, it's okay. We're here to help." He extended his hand, palm up, offering comfort rather than pressure. "Can you tell me your name?" The boy hesitated. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he muttered, "Liam." David exchanged a glance with Eric, who had already pulled out his phone. "I'll call the police," Eric said, wiping rain off the screen with his sleeve. But before he could dial, Liam let out a sharp breath and took a step back. "No." His voice, though small, was filled with desperation. "No police." David's stomach tightened. It wasn't just fear, it was terror. Eric hesitated, lowering his phone. "Liam, we need to find your parents. Someone is looking for you." The boy shook his head violently. "I can't go back," he said, his voice trembling. The words sent a chill through David that had nothing to do with the rain. He had seen this before, children running from something, not just lost in the shuffle of a busy city but escaping something worse. A car rushed past, spraying a wave of water onto the sidewalk. Liam flinched at the noise, his body recoiling as if expecting a blow. David took a slow breath, keeping his voice calm. "Okay. No police. But we can't leave you out here. Will you come with us?" Liam hesitated, glancing at Eric, then back at David. Something in his small frame loosened, as if deciding to believe them, if only for a moment. Finally, he gave a small nod. David felt the tension in his chest release just a fraction. Eric, still watching the boy carefully, leaned in and whispered, "Are we sure about this?" No, they weren't. Not at all. But David couldn't ignore the way Liam's tiny fingers curled into his sleeve, holding on as if it was the only solid thing in a world spinning out of control. "We'll figure it out," David murmured back. They turned toward their apartment, Liam walking between them, his small frame still trembling. Neither of them knew it yet, but bringing Liam into their home wasn't just an act of kindness. It was the start of something much bigger, something that would test everything they believed about love, family, and the risks that come with doing what's right. The apartment was warm, a stark contrast to the storm still raging outside. David flicked on the lights, casting a soft glow over the living room, and Eric quickly grabbed a towel from the hallway closet. Liam stood just inside the doorway, his small frame soaked through, water dripping onto the hardwood floor. His sneakers squelched with every hesitant step. David kneeled in front of him, holding out the towel. "Here, let's get you dried off." Liam hesitated before taking it. He clutched the fabric like it was a shield, rubbing his face with small, shaky hands. Eric disappeared into their bedroom and returned with a dry hoodie and a pair of sweatpants. "These might be big, but they're warm." Liam glanced at the clothes but didn't move. His eyes darted between the two men, as if waiting for something. Maybe permission, maybe reassurance. David gave him a gentle smile. "You can change in the bathroom. No rush." Liam grabbed the clothes and disappeared behind the door. When the lock clicked, Eric exhaled and turned to David. "This is a terrible idea." David crossed his arms. "You saw the way he reacted. He's scared. More than just lost." Eric ran a hand through his damp hair. "Yeah, and now we're harboring a kid we know nothing about. What if his parents are looking for him? What if—" The bathroom door creaked open. Liam had changed, the hoodie hanging loosely around his thin frame. His wet clothes were bundled in his arms. He shifted awkwardly, his gaze dropping to the floor. David softened. "Are you hungry?" Liam gave the smallest nod. Eric sighed, defeated, and headed to the kitchen. "I'll make something." Over the next hour, they learned a little more about their unexpected guest. Liam barely spoke at first, answering in nods or one-word sentences, but the more he ate, the grilled cheese sandwich disappearing in careful bites, the more his guard seemed to lower. His parents weren't mentioned. He didn't ask to call anyone. The few questions David asked, like where he lived, were met with stiff shoulders and silence. David didn't push. He knew kids like Liam needed time. Later that night, after setting up the couch with extra blankets, Eric pulled David aside. "We should take him to the police in the morning." David's jaw tightened. "He asked us not to." "He's a child, David. We can't just keep him here." David looked toward the couch, where Liam had curled into a small ball beneath the blankets. His tiny fingers clutched the edge of the fabric like it was the only thing keeping him safe. "I just need to figure out why he's so scared," David said quietly. Eric hesitated before sighing. "One night. But we call someone tomorrow." David nodded, though he wasn't sure if he meant it. The next morning, Liam was gone. Panic surged through David as he rushed to the door, only to find it still locked from the inside. His chest tightened. "Liam!" The bathroom door creaked open, and Liam peeked out, eyes wary. David exhaled in relief. "You scared me." Liam stepped out slowly, rubbing his arm. "Sorry." Eric handed him a bowl of cereal, but Liam hesitated before taking it. That hesitation, that flinch, made David's stomach turn. David sat beside him. "Liam, can you tell me what happened?" Why were you out there alone? Liam didn't answer right away. He stared at the cereal, stirring the spoon in small circles. Then, in a whisper, he said, "They don't want me." David's heart clenched. Eric leaned forward. "Your parents?" Liam swallowed, nodding once. "They said, I don't belong." His voice wavered, and he curled into himself as if making himself smaller would make the words hurt less. David exchanged a look with Eric. They understood now. Eric sat back, rubbing his hands over his face. "Okay. So what do we do?" David had no answers. He only knew one thing. Liam wasn't going back to a place that didn't want him. Over the next few days, they tried to reach out to authorities, but every attempt led to the same reality. Liam's parents had reported him missing, but when contacted, they showed no urgency in getting him back. Social services were overloaded, and the system was not always kind to children like Liam, children who didn't fit into their parents' expectations. David couldn't let that happen. So they made a decision. They filed for temporary guardianship, a process that came with scrutiny and endless questions. Every conversation with caseworkers felt like a test, as if they had to prove they were capable of caring for a child just because they were two men. Eric, ever the logical one, handled the paperwork and legal details. David focused on Liam, making sure he felt safe, wanted. Slowly, Liam opened up. He smiled more, talked more. He started drawing pictures and taping them to the fridge. He laughed at David's terrible jokes and sat beside Eric while he worked, fascinated by the blueprints on his screen. But there were setbacks. One afternoon, a stranger recognized them in the park. A woman, mid-40s, narrowed her eyes. "Is that the missing boy? The one on the news?" David's stomach dropped. He forced a calm smile. "He's safe." The woman's expression hardened. "You're keeping him." Eric stepped between them. "Have a nice day." But the whispers started. Online forums. Neighbors. People who didn't know them but judged anyway. One night, a rock crashed through their window. Liam screamed. David ran to him, heart racing, as Eric cursed under his breath, looking at the shattered glass. A note was attached. "Give him back." David's hands shook with rage. "We're not sending him back to people who don't love him." Eric grabbed his phone. "We're calling the police." Liam clutched David's shirt. "Please don't make me go." David held him tighter. "We won't." Eric placed the call. No matter how hard the fight, they weren't giving up. They would protect Liam. They would be his family, even if the world didn't understand. The hearing room was colder than David expected. Sterile, impersonal, just another government office with flickering fluorescent lights and outdated furniture. But to him, to Eric, and to the little boy gripping his hand, this place held the power to decide everything. Liam sat between them, his small fingers clenched around David's sleeve. He was dressed in the best clothes they could find, a button-up shirt that was slightly too big and jeans that made him look just a little older. But his eyes, wide and fearful, made it clear that he understood the weight of today. Across the room, Liam's biological parents sat stiffly in their chairs. They hadn't spoken a word to him, hadn't even looked at him. His mother scrolled through her phone, uninterested, while his father sat with arms crossed, his jaw tight. The judge adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. "Mr. and Mrs. Lawson, you originally reported your son missing. Now you're here stating that you do not wish to reclaim custody. Is that correct?" Liam's mother barely looked up. "Yes. We've discussed it. We feel that other people would be a better fit." The words stung, even though David had expected them. Liam flinched, his grip tightening. David squeezed his hand reassuringly. The judge turned his gaze to them. "And Mr. Carter, Mr. Reynolds, you're requesting guardianship of Liam Lawson, correct?" Eric sat up straighter. "Yes, Your Honor. Liam has been living with us for the past few weeks, and we'd like to make it permanent." The judge studied them carefully. "You understand what this means. Full custody is a lifelong commitment." David didn't hesitate. "We do." The judge nodded, flipping through a file. "Social Services has conducted a home study. You both have stable careers, a safe home environment, and have provided for Liam's emotional and physical well-being during this process." A woman from Social Services, seated near the front, spoke up. I visited their home twice. Liam is thriving with them. He's comfortable, well cared for, and," she glanced at Liam, softening, "he's happy." The judge looked at Liam then. "Liam, do you understand what's happening today?" Liam nodded slowly but didn't speak. The judge softened. "And do you want to stay with Mr. Carter and Mr. Reynolds?" Liam hesitated. Then, in the smallest voice, he whispered, "Yes." David felt Eric exhale beside him. But just as relief began to settle, Liam's father finally spoke. "This isn't right." The room tensed. Eric turned sharply. "Excuse me." Liam's father leaned forward, his expression unreadable. "Two men raising a kid? That's not normal. He needs a real family." David's stomach tightened. He had been prepared for this. But it didn't make it any easier. The judge's voice was firm. "Mr. Lawson, you forfeited your parental rights. Your personal opinions are not relevant here." But the words were already out there. The tension in the room thickened. David looked down at Liam, who was staring at his father, hurt flickering across his face. David took a breath, steadying himself. Then he turned to the judge. "With all due respect, Your Honor, Liam does have a real family." Eric placed a hand on Liam's shoulder. "We may not look like the family some people expect, but we love him. We will fight for him. We already have." David leaned forward. "Liam deserves to be wanted, to be safe, to be loved. And we love him. That's what makes a real family." Silence. The judge studied them for what felt like an eternity. Then he nodded. His gavel struck the desk. Guardianship granted. The ride home from the courthouse was quiet, but the weight in the air had shifted. David glanced in the rearview mirror, watching Liam stare out the window, his small hands resting in his lap. He looked deep in thought, as if trying to process what had just happened. David reached back, giving Liam's knee a small squeeze. "Hey, you okay?" Liam blinked and looked at him, then at Eric, who smiled at him through the mirror. Slowly, as if testing the words, Liam whispered, "I get to stay?" Eric turned in his seat, his voice warm. "Yeah, buddy. You get to stay." Liam's lips parted slightly, his brows furrowing like he wasn't sure whether to believe it. Then, slowly, his shoulders relaxed, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he let out a small, relieved breath. That night, they celebrated the only way they knew how, together, at home. David and Eric let Liam pick dinner, which resulted in a chaotic mix of pizza, ice cream, and popcorn. They let him stay up a little later than usual, watching his favorite animated movie while curled up on the couch. For the first time, Liam didn't sit at the edge of the couch with uncertainty. He nestled between them, resting his head on David's arm while Eric absent-mindedly played with his curls. It was the kind of simple, unspoken comfort that didn't need words. Halfway through the movie, Liam shifted, looking up at David. "You're sure?" David frowned slightly. "About what?" Liam hesitated. "That I can stay. That I'm not a problem." David's chest tightened. He cupped Liam's cheek gently, tilting his face up. "You were never a problem. Not for a single second." Liam studied his face, searching for any trace of doubt. Finding none, he nodded and nestled back against him, his tiny fingers gripping David's sleeve. David felt Eric's hand brush against his, a silent acknowledgement between them. This was real. This was family. Days turned into weeks, and life slowly settled into something that felt normal. Liam started school again, this time without fear of what he'd return home to. His teachers noticed a difference. He was still quiet but more engaged, more willing to participate. He made a friend in his class, a boy named Jacob, who had invited him over for a playdate. David had worried about how other parents would react, but when he met Jacob's mom, she had simply smiled warmly. "Liam talks about you both all the time. He's lucky to have you." It was a small moment, but it meant everything. At home, Liam flourished. He began decorating his bedroom, carefully selecting posters and stuffed animals. He started leaving drawings on the fridge, stick figures of the three of them holding hands under a big yellow sun. And one night, as David tucked him into bed, Liam hesitated before whispering, "Can I call you Dad?" David's throat tightened. He ran a hand through Liam's hair and nodded. "If you want to, yeah. Of course." Liam's small fingers curled around David's. "I do." And just like that, the missing piece clicked into place. The weeks of struggle, the fear, the fights, it had all led to this. Liam wasn't just a boy they had rescued from the storm that night. He was their son. Their family wasn't defined by blood, by expectation, or by the approval of strangers. It was built on love, on safety, on the simple promise that no matter what happened, they would always have each other. And for the first time in his life, Liam knew what that felt like. He was home. Years passed, but some moments stayed frozen in time. The stormy night when David and Eric found Liam. The courtroom where they fought for him. The first time he called them Dad. Now, on a bright spring afternoon, Liam ran across the backyard, his laughter ringing through the air. He was taller now, his curls still wild, his smile brighter than ever. He had just turned 10 last month, and his world was no longer filled with fear. It was filled with bike rides, bedtime stories, and a family that never let him feel unwanted again. David watched from the porch, coffee in hand, as Eric chased Liam across the grass. Their golden retriever, Max, barked excitedly, running in circles around them. Eric finally caught Liam, lifting him into the air as he shrieked with laughter. "Gotcha!" Liam grinned, breathless. "You cheated!" Eric gasped dramatically. "I would never!" David chuckled, shaking his head. "He totally did." Liam beamed, his eyes full of something that once seemed impossible: security, belonging, love. David had once wondered if they were making the right choice. If they could be enough. But as Liam ran back toward him, throwing his arms around him without hesitation, he knew. Love had made them a family. And no storm, no judgment, no doubt could ever take that away.